Well, welcome, Bernie Wagenblast, to Let Them Talk.
Thank you so
Good
much,
to have you
Paul.
on the show. And I just want to. And so, wow, we have, it's a break from the usual. I mean, we haven't had, well, you have such a unique job.
This is true.
I mean, we should have a What's My Line? What's my, wow, that'd be great.
What's my voice?
Yeah, that's the way, I like that, great. All right, so this is now, folks, this is a Manhattan show, so most people, unless they're on the internet, and there are people around the world listening to us on the internet, but most of our viewers on television are New York residents, so they're people, for the most part, who take the subways.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're on this platform, on the subway, waiting for the train, they might hear a voice telling them that the train is coming in 3 minutes, as I heard today, right? Well, Bernie Wagenblast, what would I be hearing on the subway if there was a train coming with 4 minutes to go? If I was on the 14th Street A train waiting for the E to 34th Street?
Well, if it was the A and the E, you wouldn't hear me. But if it
Okay.
was one of the numbered lines, the old IRT lines, 1 through 6, then you might hear me say something like, the next, downtown, number 2, will arrive in 3 minutes.
Well, guys, do you recognize that voice? Okay. This is Bernie Wagenblast, the voice, among other things. We're going to talk about the other things, but it's fascinating to open the show with the voice of the New York City subway system on the platforms on the numbered 1 through 6 lines. All right, so there is a voice. It's not a computer.
It's a computer that puts it together. What I basically did was record about 1,000 different words and phrases that the computer then puts together that's appropriate for whatever the case may be, if the train is delayed or however many minutes it is, whether it's a local or an express, what line it is, what the station it's going to. So the computer puts it all together, which is why it sounds a little disjointed when you hear it and not a smooth sentence like what you would typically hear in a conversation.
That's fascinating. So how do you have a list of words? You sat in front of a microphone and you just read each word? Was there a producer who sat there and said, Bernie, do the again, please?
There was an engineer. We took hours and hours to do this over a number of different days because we had to do every street and you had to do all the numbers 1 through 233rd. So there was a lot that had to be recorded. And after a while, your eyes start to bug out.
I can imagine.
You're doing all that. You know,
Right.
Did I just say that right, or am I doing that correctly?
So it depends on the engineer, right?
Yes, he has to
Right.
have a good ear to listen to that.
Who does that? Where does that? Was that produced at WNYC or at some city studio somewhere?
No, it was recorded in a recording studio in New Jersey, actually. And then after we recorded it, it was sent, believe it or not, to Austria, where they did some magical technological things with it to make it sound a little bit better. So when it's in the subway, obviously the subway stations are not the most acoustically friendly atmosphere.
New York City subways were world famous for the total unintelligibility of the announcements. Mostly it would be, you would hear, I would get a feeling of shock and awe and fear as soon as I would hear the click and then the loud because I knew that I was going to be assaulted now, worse than anything you could imagine by and then the person would like say more, like, oh, and let me be more helpful. Right? But it's been much better with this new system, obviously.
Yeah, when they did that technological stuff, they made it so that, and they put in many more speakers, I believe, as well in the station.
Sure.
So it's not just 5 speakers trying to fill up a whole platform. But you can understand much more easily what's being said.
Absolutely. It's a different
and
thing.
it's amazing.
That's true. That's amazing. Wow, that's one of the words. Now, tell us, how did you, because you started in weather, really, with the famous shadow traffic, which I first started picking up on WNYC. I mean, you probably started before that, maybe, but I remember hearing shadow traffic, reading about your history and your background, and it was sort of, I call it the hip traffic report, right? It was a whole different take on traffic and on weather in general, where the readers were sort of speaking to you, and in a more, not like a person sitting in another room who's just being handed copy and reading it off in a monotone. This is what the weather, this is what the traffic is here, this is what the traffic is here, this is what the weather is going to be. But instead it was somebody actually communicating to the listener.
Well, I became part of Shadow Traffic when they first came to New York, which was 1979, believe it or not. It's hard to believe it was that long ago.
I know, right.
And what was different about Shadow was that we were doing most of the radio stations in the city as well as the suburbs and doing the traffic reports. Before then, you had basically two radio stations, WOR and WCBS, which had their own helicopters, and everybody else kind of listened to them and wrote down what they had to say and maybe made a few phone calls. But now you had this organization that was gathering their own information from a variety of sources. We had spotters, for instance, who were on top of the Empire State Building and the World Trade Center with binoculars.
Like news. Like it was news. Like treating the weather as it was news.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was fun because you were on so many different stations, and sometimes you would have to use different names because you were on competing radio stations.
Oh, really?
So I was on WABC, which at that time was still a music station.
Sure.
And the name I had when I was on WABC was Jack Packard. But when I was on 1010 Winds, which at that time, as it still is now, an all-news station, I used my real name, Bernie Wagenblast. So you would have to tailor your delivery depending on what station you were doing and what their format was.
Okay, great. But what did that? What led to this idea? How come it took so long, I should say, to bring everything together into one source? And then, I mean, why would you have their own? I mean, you know, you see WKRP or something like that, these radio shows, and they always had their own weather guy who was his own personality sometimes and things like that. But most of the time, it reminds me of Ronald Reagan, right? He would get the sports reports in written format. He wasn't even at the game, and he would add all the color.
Right.
He didn't really see it. He didn't know. Well, he had no idea what was going on except that he would make it up as he went along. So in this way, it was more, as I was saying earlier, more like news. It was like really as it was. Well, tell me about, what's different? I mean, you have this traffic blog. I wanted to get to that, and because it's all very interesting, the radio aspect. I want to talk more about it in your voice, and you have this beautiful radio voice and everything. But tell us a little bit about what I was just saying. What about traffic in New York City? About the tunnels? About about how people get here and get out of New York? I mean, why is there an interest in that now?
Well, I think because so many people are traveling, and of course in New York, it's not just the roads; it's the transit system, which carries a tremendous percentage of the people who are traveling about. And it's not just, again, the subway. You have the PATH train from New Jersey. You have all the commuter rail lines like Metro North, the LIRR, New Jersey Transit.
How many people travel in New York every day? How many come in and go out? Like millions?
Millions. I'm not sure what the actual number is, but there are millions of people that are traveling. And it's not just rush hours, obviously. I do traffic now just on Saturdays. And even on Saturdays, it's amazing to see the number of vehicles that are out on the roads and people who are trying to get about and endlessly getting stuck.
Is there a logic to it?
To a certain extent, but I think the big thing that drives New York, of course, and I don't mean that as a pun, is the fact that Manhattan is an island. And there are only so many access points to get on and off of Manhattan Island. And that's where the bottlenecks obviously tend to occur most often.
Absolutely, on the bridges and the tunnels. Sometimes they can. What's the worst traffic jam you've ever experienced that you can remember?
There was probably one of the worst was blizzards. I've worked through several blizzards. Those are unique because everything just shuts down. The last blizzard we had, I guess, about a year and a half ago, everything was at a stop. You couldn't get anywhere, even on Manhattan streets. I remember when I was first starting out in radio, I was working at a radio station that was on Park Avenue, and we had a bad snowstorm then. And to see people who were cross-country skiing down the middle of Park Avenue with no traffic was one of those sights that you just can't believe until you see it.
So they just shut down. That's the worst. When they have a snowstorm, they shut down the city. How about those regular traffic? What are the things that cause, rubbernecking delays? What's a rubbernecking delay? Is that really a serious problem? Does that cause delays? People actually looking into another lane as they go by can cause all those problems? Yeah,
because everyone slows down, and I think the psychology behind it is, well, if I've been sitting here for 20 minutes, a half hour, an hour waiting to get through, then I'm at least going to take a look and see what's going on. And I think there's just curiosity when you pass by an accident scene to wonder what was going on and why you're delayed. And there may even not be any lanes that are blocked. It may be off to the side of the roadway, but people still slow down and that just causes everyone behind them to get caught in the backup.
It doesn't take much, right?
Oh, not at all, no.
Right? So people don't realize that that tap of the brake actually can cause some mathematical formula, an algorithmic situation that next thing you know, it's like people are like, what's going on? What caused this?
And it can just be amazing how far that traffic gets backed up.
I have a lot of questions about New York Railway. By the way, we're live, so if folks want to call, we'll try and take your call. If you have a traffic question or a question about mass transit in New York or New Jersey, we'll talk about that. So our number is on the screen. I hope it is anyway. And it's, let me make sure that it's, I think it's on. I hope it is. Anyway, if it isn't, our number is 212-757-1538. 212-757-1538. So give us a call and we can ask your question. If you have sort of something you can add, maybe a traffic story to tell us, because I'm sure everybody in New York does. I have a lot of questions. I guess the Sheridan Expressway in the Bronx. Are you aware of that or following that?
Yeah, a little bit about where they were talking about possibly closing it and turning it into parkland, and I guess most recently the city said, no, we're not going to close it because they felt that it would cause too many traffic problems to do that.
What about the idea of actually some of these highways? I mean, when Robert Moses was building them, he had a lot of genius. He had forethought in building some of them, but in some of the things he built he was over the top. He was pushing it beyond the limits. And do you think that we need more or less, same amount of roadways? Is that the problem?
Well, you could always argue that you could use more, but the problem is when you build more roadways, the traffic quickly fills it up.
Yeah.
So I don't think that that's an answer to traffic problems.
Right. More highways.
I think more of the answers, especially in a city like New York and the surrounding area, is better using technology more intelligently to better direct the traffic. For instance, how they time the traffic signals in Manhattan is just amazing. All the engineering that goes into something like that.
Is it true you go 27 miles an hour and never hit? If you can
That's what I've heard. I'm not an engineer myself.
I've done it, and I've driven the 2nd Avenue all the way down from 125th Street to the Lower East Side, and you can do it if you can hold at 27 miles an hour. It's not easy. It's easy if you have a very large vehicle. Then people stay away from you. But if they're not staying away from you, somebody's going to slow you up, and all you have to do is get slow a little bit, and you're off the pattern. And then boom, you hit the next light. But it's amazing. If you can keep 27 miles an hour, it seems to be able to work. What about pedestrians and bicycles? What do you think about the mayor's, what he's been doing as far as adding all these bicycle lanes and sort of doing it by fiat, which annoys some people, sort of like the big gulp, right? It's like, it has people annoyed. Even if it might be right, the way he does it sort of tends to annoy people. But others have told me that's the only way you could do it.
Well, I'm not so sure about the process. I think it's certainly a good idea to try to encourage people to use bicycles and to make walking better. New York by far has more pedestrian traffic than I think any other city in the country. And I'll give a lot of credit to the people who bicycle. I would be afraid, to be quite honest, to try to bicycle down some of the avenues in Manhattan. But,
so you think even though it's reduced the size of the streets and the avenues, that it's still a good idea to do that?
Well, I would be curious to know, has there been a significant increase in the number of bicyclists that are using it? Or is it just making it easier for the same number of bicycle riders? I don't know the answer to that question.
Do you think there's going to be an increase in bicycle riders? And the mayor seems to be banking on it.
I think so, because you have some plan which is going to be coming out later this summer. Hopefully that's going to encourage people. I think it has in other cities around the country and around the world. There was a story that came out just a week or so ago about a bike superhighway that they opened in Copenhagen and how that has improved travel for bicyclists going through the city. So,
dedicated bike lane for people, or bike street, really, just for bicycles in one direction and the other direction coming from the suburbs into New York. Possibility. It's a good exercise.
That's definitely
true. Darn good exercise, and it would be great if people had to move their bodies to get to work every morning. They'd probably feel better about it when they got there. All right? Maybe they feel better about it.
Just have to build showers in all the offices, right?
Yeah. Well, I worked at a place where they did do that. And so it is possible. And they wanted to encourage that kind of thing. He actually, the Boston, one place I worked wanted to encourage the workers to run. He wanted them to run, and he had showers set up so that when you came to work, you could change your clothes.
That's great.
He liked that. And it was a health-oriented business. So, great. So, okay, and Mayor had this other crazy idea that went congestion pricing. Remember that? Can you explain that to us, what it is?
Well, I can, at least the bare bones of it is, because they have it already in place in other cities, London especially notable, where a charge is automatically levied on a vehicle when it goes into a certain zone that's predetermined and signed, and it's done by cameras that would take a picture of the license plate and then somehow bill the owner of that vehicle when they go into that congestion zone. It might be only certain hours of the day, and the congestion rate can vary depending on what time of day it is. So there are a number of different variables, but
it didn't go very far.
No, I
not think in the United States, not in New York. It was just to people. It was another tax. Speaking of, I noticed coming over the George Washington Bridge the other day that this is the first time I've been over in a while. It was $12, $6 each way, right? Whew! Is that a tax or what?
Well, it's a toll, and the argument is that it's a user fee because you're only if you never use any of the toll crossings, then you're not none of your tax dollars is going towards supporting those.
I see.
But if you are a user of one of those facilities, then you are paying for its upkeep, its maintenance, things of that sort.
Why is it going up so high? $12. That's a big jump.
Doubled. It's part of it, I guess, is that the rates have, in terms of how expensive it is to maintain something like that, as they get older, it becomes more and more expensive to maintain something like that.
The expense is just getting high of running. If you want to have this luxury, really, of this bridge, you better pay for it, right? Because we saw the other bridges are starting to fall down for a while. The Manhattan Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge was on the verge of collapse. They said they might have to close it. And they put millions into that. Okay, so that makes sense, even though I was extra polite to the toll clerks, all right? Extra polite. The poor toll clerk, I go up there and I saw $12, my eyes opened, and she almost like jumped back. and I just looked at her and I said, "Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Really special, because I know she must get a lot
I'm sure.
of the brunt of it, which I feel sorry for. Okay, $12. Well, is it becoming, is that affecting people coming into New York? I mean, when they see those kind of, is it like
I think
elastic?
It does. I think well, first of all, if you're coming from New Jersey into New York City, you're pretty much limited by, if you're driving, to using a toll crossing, unlike the East River where you have some choices.
Or you can come, or even from the Bronx.
Right.
You have the Willis Avenue and the 3rd Avenue Bridge, right? Do you think they're going to put tolls on those?
I don't think that will happen. I think if something like that happens, it probably gets more back into that congestion charge type of scenario.
So we've been talking with Bernie Wagenblast, who puts out this. So tell us about the blog, how people can find out about it, where they can get it. Because I have a lot. Because we just been talking about New York, I wanted to ask you questions on New Jersey.
Sure.
About Interstate 95, like the nightmare zone of the world. All right. And but tell us how people can find out more about what you do. Because Bernie puts out this great. I mean, if you want to stay up on traffic, if you have a car or you travel anywhere that's like beyond your neighborhood. Even in your neighborhood, you should know these issues. They're key issues to everything that we do in our society today. How do we get from point A to point B without killing each other?
Well, if you want to find it, probably the fastest way, just Google Transportation Communications Newsletter. That's the name of the newsletter. I've been doing it since 1998. And basically what it is, it's a collection of news items from around the world dealing with anything concerning communications in the transportation field, and it's all modes. So you may find things that are going on at airports, maritime, transit, vehicles, highways.
So, the whole deal.
Yeah, exactly.
You have the ferries now everywhere, and people are taking ferries back. They're going back to the ferry. The old ferry, which we thought was the tunnel and the bridge had replaced, is now coming back, right? And it's a nice way to get across, right?
Oh, it's a beautiful way to get across.
Right. And up and down Manhattan, I love those things. They're great. They're a little expensive, but geez, everything's expensive nowadays. You want to go out of the house, it's expensive. Like, forget it. It's like, and you want to move like 2 tons of steel from point A to point B, or just yourself, right? It's parking. Let's go to New Jersey, right? 95. Are they ever going to? Is 95 like doomed for all time?
Well, the original plan was that they were going to build a freeway connecting Interstate 287 down through the middle of New Jersey and connect up with a highway that currently exists in Mercer County. That, I think, is never going to happen. What they are planning to do is they're finally building an interchange in Pennsylvania that connects the Pennsylvania Turnpike and Interstate 95. So you will now be able to go down the New Jersey Turnpike, connect up with the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and then get onto 95. And that will now be signed Interstate 95 the entire stretch. So I think that will be the
less confusing.
Well, hopefully.
Well, because there's a history to this, obviously, Bernie. Why isn't 95? If you try and take 95 all the way, I'm not sure. If you try and go from Philadelphia to New York, it's impossible.
Well, on Interstate 95,
right?
Because I think in part, well, first of all, they wanted to have Interstate 95, I believe, go through Philadelphia, because most people who are traveling from the New York area and say heading down toward D.C. probably stay on the New Jersey Turnpike the entire way, which is not actually, that lower portion is not part of Interstate 95. But I think most people are probably still going to stay on the New Jersey Turnpike, because you're not going through the middle of Philadelphia, which has its own traffic problems. Not as bad as New York City, but it has its share of traffic problems.
Well, it's just hard to get to Philadelphia. I mean, you have to go off, and you have to really know where you're going to get there, and you would figure that two of the largest cities in the country would be directly connected, right? And somehow they didn't do that. Okay, great. Well, Bernie, let's talk about you a little bit. How did you get into radio? I mean, how did you discover radio?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be in radio probably from about 5th grade. When I was growing up, most of my contemporaries were listening to WABC, which was top 40 music radio. I listened to WNEW-AM, people like Clavin and Finch, William B. Williams, Ted Brown. And I just was caught up in how friendly they sounded, how they connected with the listener. A station like WNEW had a wonderful news department, which was what I was interested in.
I love them. That was where I learned news. I mean, they had a music station that was primarily a music station would break religiously on the hour for 5 minutes of like really good news.
Yeah, and they had a real
commercial
news
station. I know, it was really good news. I mean, wow, like they're doing what in North Vietnam? Right? They were good. And it fit with the music and the times. Just beautiful. So that was the golden age of New York radio in a way?
Well, in some ways, at least for me it was. That was my introduction to radio, and to me that was just magical. Listening to these people that were on the radio. All of them sounded like friends, and I started when I was a kid. I would take the newspaper and just read the stories aloud so that I could work on my voice and how I would enunciate words and the pausing and everything that goes into it, so that hopefully I could sound...
is as much in what you don't say as what you say, right?
Yeah, sometimes it's just like white space on a newspaper is important. Sometimes silence is important when you're doing something with audio.
Right. Well, I happened to be on the air on 9/11 at WBAI, and I was totally unprepared for it and had no idea what was going to happen. And when I saw it and I had the microphone and everybody's looking at me, what are you going to say? My exact words were, "Don't come into work today." It's the only thing I could think of saying. People still to this day stop me and say, "I didn't come into work today because of you. Thank goodness, thank God." Right? Simple, 5 words, 6 words. Right? That's all you have. It's what you. It doesn't have to be a lot of words.
Right? No, not at all.
I know, and it's important information. And I guess let's finish up, because in this era of dangerous times that we live in, it puts a little extra, the traffic, how when the president gets here, how do you deal with it? In an emergency, how do you get out? I mean, we've had programs here where we talked about having people should have a rubber boat in Manhattan and use it to get out if they have to. How have you related to this new era of...
Well, I think one of the, I would have said this even before 9/11, but I think it's even more true now, is that you should always be aware of alternate routes. There may be one way that you go day in and day out between your home and work, but give yourself a little bit of extra time, learn some alternate routes to get around various problems. So if something does go wrong, you're not at that point trying to figure out how am I going to get somewhere and looking at maps and panicking. But if you know a lot of alternate routes, and sometimes they may take you way out of your way, but it will still get you there faster than trying to use the roads and the subway lines and the rail lines
that everybody
you're
else
familiar with.
are using right at that exact moment. That's a traffic jam question. It's sort of not related, but are you always better sticking with the main route even if there's a lot of traffic, or is it an advantage to just get off and try and use the side streets?
I think part of it is personal preference. For me, I like, because I have a pretty good sense of direction, I like trying to wend my way through the side streets and find my way. But I think a lot of people will get lost if they get onto those side streets. And of course, the people that live on those side streets don't want to have all that traffic coming down there. Unless it's something that's is going to be there for hours. An overturned flaming gasoline tanker. It usually probably makes more sense to stick with the main route.
Right.
But again, when you look at alternate routes, you can look at using main routes but still going way out of your way. You have, just in Queens, for instance, the LIE and the Grand Central Parkway, and if you're in a passenger vehicle, they may be miles apart at times, but they can still be good alternates for each other depending on what's going on.
If the LIE is jammed up, even the southern state looks good, right?
Yes.
Right. I know. Okay, good. I've been there. I think we've all been there, really, in New York. Okay, great. Now, has New York City got the worst traffic in the country?
No, well, according to studies that have been coming out recently, believe it or not, they say New York is not the worst. It often is places like Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, even some of the up-and-coming cities that are growing quickly because they haven't had the infrastructure built to handle all this influx of traffic that's coming to their towns.
What's the worst spot in New York in the city?
I think generally the Cross-Bronx Expressway is considered to be the worst.
When it comes to that spaghetti there that they're working on now, making it worse, and when there's a baseball game and the Yankee people getting out or going to the Yankees game, we've all heard it before, right? That is, are they doing something with that, or is that just...
Well, they're doing some work now, but it's not really going to be adding a whole lot of capacity. It's going to improve the ramps that go from the Cross-Bronx Expressway to the Major Deegan.
Right.
But there's not a whole lot you can do with the Cross-Bronx itself, other than keep your fingers crossed that there's not an accident when you're headed there.
Thank you, Bernie Wagenblast, for telling us a lot, for enlightening us about traffic and the situation with mass transit and traffic. And give us one more. Let's hear you announce a train is coming into the station.
Well, let me do one for the air train at JFK and Newark Airport. I do those. The next stop is Terminal B. Airlines serving Terminal B are Air France, Air India, Alitalia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
All right.